Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance will include Skittles endorsements, Freudian psychoanalysis, and the cutest pet you've ever seen. All this as we discuss unicorns here on Created Things.
Hello and welcome to Created Things, the world's only podcast brought to you by two guys who don't really know how animals work, but do know a lot about Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Father Gabriel Tretta, medievalist, Dominican priest, guy who doesn't really know how animals work. And with me is my co-host, more importantly, Jacob Flores Popchek, artist, psychotherapist, guy who does researches on weird animals. We're not talking about that.
Research.
Actually, we are going to talk about that.
I do a weird amount of research into animals, and I would also hope that you, as a Catholic priest, know more about Jesus Christ than I do. So hopefully there's both a complementarity and sort of a differentiation in our abilities there.
Yeah, I feel like that's basically our whole jam for this podcast. Is basically like, well, we both like things. Not always the same things, and when it is the same thing, never in the same way. But maybe complementary.
Real bold choice to start off with. We don't know a lot about how animals work. We do know a lot about Jesus, and we do know a lot about art, which I would think would be the more natural thing on this arts podcast that we have, but that's okay. You can do what you want.
Yeah. But then we wouldn't be, that's called an undistributed middle. You know, there's something in the middle. Why are we talking about here? Why are we talking about aminals? Why are we talking about Jesus Christ? Well, because there's something in the middle, and the thing in the middle is animals who are Jesus Christ in art, Jesus Christ who is an animal in art, and the two of them, turns out that the twain shall meet.
You're really giving, you're not burying the lead at all here.
No,
you're giving it all away. You're getting right into the thick of things.
I have uncovered the lead. Don't worry, I know how it's spelled. I know there's no A in it, and I just went ahead and I uncovered it. So that's what I did with it. I found the lead, and then I pulled it out of the ground.
So we are, as you will know from the title of this episode, dear listener, talking about unicorns today. And as you will have noted from Father Gabriel's little preview there's a lot Jesus-y apparently about unicorns, which I wasn't keenly aware of until we started doing some research for this episode. And also, unicorns is an art motif. It's just kind of everywhere. And there's so many different artists who have done interesting things with unicorns. And I'm always interested whenever we can hit on a topic where there's like a specific motif or a character or a creature or something that just appears in huge amounts of artwork, regardless of the period, regardless of the media, right? Whether it's frescoes and paintings or sculptures and statues to, toys and video games and cartoons, right? That inevitably is something that draws my attention, but listeners might be surprised. This was not one of my topic ideas. This was one of your topic ideas.
Woo-woo.
So
yeah,
why did you, sad, boring man who lives in a castle in the middle of Europe, just vampirically, honestly, vampirically, if we're being honest.
It's a priory, but it's very vampiric though. It's very baroque.
It is very vampiric.
Yes.
So why did you, if it's not baroque, we don't fix it. So why did you want to talk about unicorns?
So listen, I travel back in time with me. Close your eyes. No, close your eyes. It's
to the year
2005 specifically, actually. Okay. I'm living in New York. Interested, Catholic, interested in maybe the priesthood, maybe already. I can't remember. But I have no idea what this means. Anyway, just kind of medieval. And I know nothing about like medieval Western culture because at this point I've just been doing Japanese stuff for a long time. Living in New York, and there's this museum there called the Cloisters, which is the
best.
A rich dude literally went to where there was an abandoned medieval French monastery and was just like, hey, what if I paid you a bunch of money to move this to America? And they were like, pourquoi pas? And he just
literally brick by brick, right? He literally
it's completely insane.
Those are my sort of Dave Ramsey financial goals.
Yeah.
Like if my accountant or something says, what are your financial goals for this year? I say, I really would like to get to the point that I could move a monastery brick by brick from its country to
over the sea,
my
which has to be
country.
over an ocean. Yeah.
Right,
this
yeah.
this did turn out to leave a pretty bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, because they were like, wait a second, did a really rich American dude just buy a ruined monastery and move it to America? And they were like, maybe. But I mean, at the same time, it was fallen down. Anyway, it's complicated. It's a complicated story. But anyway, it's filled with and now it's kind of a playhouse monastery museum. Of course, a lot of ruined ex-monasteries in many places in Western Europe are kind of playhouse museums, but just not as lavishly done. So this is full of like a lot of the Met's kind of medieval collection, and it's got all this wonderful stuff. And so anyways, I was wandering around it, and it's kind of just this lovely gardeny area, and they play around with the playland faux monastery thing, pretty big. And it's really pretty, and you're wandering around. And again, like at this point I knew so little about Christian iconography that like I didn't even know like what the INRI on top of a crucifix is. I had no idea.
It stands for, as my parish priest told me when I was about to make my first communion, it stands for I'm nailed right in.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's definitely what it means, and I'm not going to contradict that. That's definitely what it means.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Don't contradict my religious trauma.
No, of course
Are you
not.
kidding me?
That's absolutely right. And so I'm wandering around, and at one point, if you're in the cloisters, you get to this point where you walk into this room. It might be a series of rooms, I forget. That is just like wall after wall after wall of these gigantic tapestries. And like the tapestry, I mean, we should at least have an episode on some specific tapestry at some point, because tapestry is such a weird art form, and not a kind of visual language that's really intuitive for basically anybody in the 21st century. But like, I was like, but they're really incredibly beautiful, just stunning, beautiful. And they're just, I can't even tell you how gigantic they are. I mean, they're like, like 30 feet by 15 feet. And there's like a dozen of them. They're huge. And they're all depicting like various stages of a bunch of like kind of pissed off looking 15th century dudes hunting a unicorn. And I was like, okay. This seems like the kind of weird jam I would expect to be represented on tapestry. And I'm walking around just jamming out with this like, yeah, dudes hunt unicorns. I mean, we've all been there. I've hunted unicorns. You've hunted unicorns. Not my proudest moment, but like we've all done it, We were all kids once. And then at one point, like one of the little placards, like the explanatory placards in the museum says like, but of course, the unicorn represents Christ. And we're thinking, oh, but of course.
Right. Which, like, the second you start to dabble in either art history or religion, what you find out is, when you get a group of people who really believe in Christ together, suddenly everything represents Christ, and it sort of becomes like a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon between whatever thing you find in the natural world and something about the divine. And that's not something exclusive to Christianity, right? I mean, many Eastern religions will do, similar things with, representation and stuff. But I do think there's something kind of fundamentally weird about images like the tapestries of the Met cloisters being compared to Christ, and weird to the degree that it is not automatically intuitive, because there's never any like the, in a lot, I'm trying to think of the right way to put this, in a lot of sort of this symbolizes Christ stuff, it's always like the thing is sacrificing itself, or the thing is, triumphing over death, or whatever else. And it's like, no, with the unicorn, it is this really, and let's be clear what we're talking about with unicorns here, right? We are not at this point in the history of the unicorn as an artistic motif talking about a beautiful big white horse that just happens to have a horn on its head. We're talking about like a weird, shaggy, wild goat with like crazy eyes and a long lion's tail, and then just like the largest, spikiest horn just sticking straight out of its head. And it's this, kind of frothing at the mouth, crazy thing that's being chased ostensibly by the heroes of the image, like the people we're supposed to be rooting for. And there's just nothing that screams like, oh, sure, these are the themes of sacrifice or whatever that medieval people automatically want to tie into Jesus. And yet you're not wrong. The second you even Google like unicorns in art, you're going to find like 50 hits talking about like, oh yeah, of course this represents Jesus, with not much explanation as to why.
Yeah.
And it really raises an eyebrow because, and I do want to read this quote. I was hoping to start off with this quote from The Guardian that was trying to kind of trace the history of unicorns. And it's a really funny quote. They say, ultimately, there aren't many creatures that have been a representation of Christ, a panacea, a gay rights campaigner, and a popular fashion accessory. And they're so right? Because unicorns are this really, really ubiquitous, always representing very niche things. And those niche things don't seem to have a lot in common necessarily with each other or really with unicorns.
And why does every 6-year-old girl on the planet love unicorns?
Right. But that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, again, it's like you say unicorn and, it draws to mind for most people like the unicorn frappe at Starbucks. It's just like rainbow and glittery, or, maybe you think, Harry Pottery type fantasy stuff, or maybe you think My Little Pony type girly stuff, or maybe you think of like this weird, crazy goat running through the forest of a medieval tapestry. How are those things all unicorns? How do they have anything in common with each other? I don't blame you for being really weirded out that they would just in such a laissez-faire way, be like, oh yeah, of course, Jesus.
Of course it is. Yeah. So, as is our want, and specifically wantiest in my direction, I would like to pull back a little bit to some sweet textual sources to talk about the kind of Christian background of this.
Yeah, by all means, yeah.
So it basically, having looked into this, you get it coming from two major streams. The major stream is, again, travel back in time. It's the 3rd and 2nd century BC. You are
also way further back in time than before, when we just went to 2005.
That is actually farther in time before 2005. That's true, actually, by a fair amount.
A couple of years.
By a couple of decades at least. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly, but
at
a fair
least
amount.
5 years.
I say at least, at least. So it's like the 3rd to 2nd century BC. You are a Jewish person living in Alexandria in Egypt, and like most Jewish people, you don't really speak Hebrew, but you're real good at Greek. And fortunately, like a bunch of your pals have just gotten together and have translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, which is the text that gets known in the Christian tradition as the Septuagint, there's a legend about how it was translated by 70 people. But anyway, but here's the thing. So that so the Hebrew scriptures get translated into Greek between the 3rd and 2nd century BC in Alexandria. And for most of the Christian tradition going forward, for Jewish tradition and then Christian tradition going forward, that's like the scriptures that people know. So that's what feeds into the Latin translations and all the rest. But you're living in Alexandria. There's all of these animals that are talked about in the Hebrew scriptures that don't exist in Alexandria, that don't exist in Egypt. And some of them are kind of cryptic, even if you were living in Palestine, in Jerusalem and stuff, because it's, there's animals with one reference in all of Hebrew writings, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you do? Well,
we're using names for those animals that are now out of date,
exactly, or all that kind of stuff. So what they tended to do was they tended to replace the name of an animal that didn't exist in Alexandria at the time, or Egypt in general, with an animal that they thought was relatively similar-ish, or not, but maybe. So depending.
It wasn't a science. It wasn't a science.
It was an art. Yeah. So there's this word. I don't speak Hebrew, but I know how to read letters. And there's this word that's re'em that gets used a bunch of times in the Hebrew scriptures in some significant places. And the word itself is it means a wild ox, basically. But it's a species of wild ox that they didn't have in Alexandria, in the area around at the time. So the way that they translated it into Greek is monokeros, which just means one horn. And that's that. No explanation, just there it is. This ends up having some fun immediate effects in the scriptures. So like there's this famous passage in Deuteronomy where Moses is blessing, is handing blessings to the 12 tribes. And his blessing of the tribe of Joseph is that it says, like, this is how it goes in English: his firstling bull has majesty, and his horns are the horns of a re'em. But in Greek, this is going to be of a monokeros, and then this gets represented into, not by Jerome, but by the earlier Latin translations, would tend to be really, 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 really super literal, as a unicorn. So now you have Moses, who's kind of a big deal. I don't know if you know this, blessing the tribe of Joseph, saying like, you are like a beautiful boar. You're like a beautiful ox with the horn of a unicorn. And it goes forth from there. There's a whole bunch of these things. So here's one stream going forward, is that you get this funny connection between Hebrew and then Greek, and then into semi-junky, just some semi-super duper literal Latin, where now all of a sudden the Bible is full of unicorns. Because this animal
just
actually
chock-a-block
just
of
chock-a-block with unicorns, because this animal gets mentioned a bunch. As just a symbol of strength. So
I do want to interject there, only because,
by all means,
I had read some sources claiming that this word re'em might have also been referring to certain subspecies of rhinoceros as well. So that there is a division here. It could be a wild ox, it could be a rhinoceros, or it could be a unicorn. And that actually does speak to, there are specific times where like God's mightiness is described as a charging something.
Something
right?
that charges and is powerful.
And it's something that charges and rips through everything. And that kind of makes sense if you're talking about like a wild, crazy ox or a rhinoceros. But it's absolutely delightful if you're talking about just a unicorn busting through everything.
Just like, a unicorn just kicking the crap out of everything. Just doesn't even care. This unicorn does not give two craps. Yeah. Right. And then that's exactly right. And then this connects to the second stream that goes into this, which is our boy Pliny the Elder. Don't forget, Pliny the Younger has nothing to do with him except that he's his dad. Right. So Pliny
he has not yet blown himself up.
Correct.
At Pompeii.
Exactly. Thank you for remembering. I'm so proud of you. That's so
great.
I
learned that from you in our Pompeii episode. I'm piecing things together.
You're so amazing.
I'm getting smarterer.
You're getting so brilliant. So he dies in Pompeii on August 24th, 79, which is totally great. It's so awesome that you remember that. That's great. Now it's time to do the like kids TV show thing. Be like, kids, do you remember where Pliny the Elder died?
God, I've joked before with you and our producer Kyle about having a children's show, and it would just be intolerably dry.
This would be like,
now children. Children, do you remember what date Pliny the Elder died at Pompeii? Say it with me.
August 24th, 79, children. What did he die of? Did he get cholera? Did he have a cough? Did he get blown up by a volcano that he was stupidly trying to observe from a boat in the Bay of Naples? Which one do you think it was?
It's the cough. It's the cough one. It's the cough.
It was a cough. I'm pretty sure it was a cough. He had a catarrh and then died.
What if he did actually die of a cough, but just as he died, suddenly the volcano exploded and
suddenly the volcano blew up. Yeah, maybe he just had, that's it. Maybe he just had a heart attack.
We'll never know. Someone.
No.
We can't autopsy someone who got evaporated by a volcano on a boat.
Isn't that sad? That's a lot of sadness in the world.
Yeah,
that's one of them.
It's real sad.
So So before this happened, he wrote this book, The Natural History, which is the super influential book in the history of the world. And at one point he's talking about like, hey, what kind of stuff do they got in India? Well, in India, listen, they got critters, and they describes a bunch of critters that you find in India. And then he says this as well. There's a very fierce animal called the monoceros. Now he's writing in Latin, but he uses this Greek word, which is the same Greek word unrelated, but it's the same Greek word. So he doesn't translate into as unicorn. He uses the same Greek word. It's called the monoceros, which has, wait for it. Picture in your mind, what does a unicorn look like? Yes. Head of a stag, feet of the elephant, tail of the boar, while the rest of the body is like that of a horse. It makes a deep lowing noise, and it has a single black horn, which projects from the middle of its forehead 2 cubits in length. This animal, it is said, cannot be taken alive. There you go. So that's
to me,
plenty on the
that
unicorn.
sounds exactly like an Indian rhinoceros in many ways.
How dare? Whoa,
it sounds like
whoa.
a second.
How dare you?
It sounds like a second-hand account of an Indian rhinoceros.
Did you hear how long its horn was? Did you hear how long it was? This has nothing to do with a rhinoceros.
So 2 cubits, which is a measurement from, isn't that like an Old Testament? Like, didn't Noah measure the ark in cubits?
He does, but it's
like the length of
it's rendered
the tip of your fingers to like your elbow, right?
Elbow,
so that's
I think,
a long horn.
That's a long horn.
Yeah, that's like 2 lengths of arm sticking out of this animal's head.
Yeah, big.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot going on there.
It's a big horn.
So basically, what these 2 streams, Ghostbusters style, cross as you would expect in one glorious moment. And the major place this is this text called the Physiologus, which also originates in Alexandria in Greek, but 4 centuries later, so in the 2nd century after Christ, gets translated into Latin sometime before 386. We don't know when. It's like the major source for medieval bestiaries. So although we still haven't had a chance to talk about bestiaries, they do always get to come up because they're always on the table.
Yeah, we haven't talked about bestiaries because we've talked about bestiaries so many times.
It's hard not to because they're always there.
Every episode really is just a collection of Twilight references and bestiary citations.
That's exactly right. Speaking of which, are there unicorns in Twilight? Because I feel like there probably should be.
Oh God, there should be. I don't think there are.
Don't you think like
that's
Jacob
so weird?
James,
what a huge missed opportunity.
Whatever those guys' names are. Don't you think that they should have written unicorns?
Jacob Black.
Yeah,
I do think
2
that
people
Jacob Black and Edward Cullen should have written vampires. They're 2 separate people. Jacob Black and Edward Cullen are 2 separate people.
I knew that. But
really, in a sense, they're one person because they represent the duality of men. No, I'm kidding. There's just
no, actually, that's
there are no unicorns in it though.
That's sad. What a waste opportunity. So here's what the author of the Physiologus says. So he's writing. This is now from the Latin translation, which is really influential. He says, so there's an animal which in Greek is called the monoceros. Okay, and in Latin, the unicorn. Hello. So now we've got the unicorn. So the Physiologus, which is just like the guy who knows about stuff, guy who knows about animals and stuff. He says that the unicorn has this nature. It's a small animal similar to a goat, exceedingly wild. It has 1 horn in the middle of its head. It is utterly impossible for a hunter to capture the unicorn, but he can be caught by this trick. Get ready. One weird trick, just like you would expect. Hunters lead a virgin maid to where he is and leave her there. And they just send her into the forest alone. And then the unicorn, as soon as he sees her, he leaps into her bosom and embraces her. And then he can be captured and taken into the palace of the king. Next sentence, I swear, no ellipses. So is our Lord Jesus Christ, the spiritual unicorn, descending into the womb of the Virgin through the flesh taken from her, captured by the Jews, condemned to death on the cross, of whom David said, and my beloved son is like the unicorn. And it goes on from there. And it goes on to quote, for instance, among other things, the passage from Deuteronomy that I talked about earlier, that his horn is like the horn of a unicorn. And that's basically where it goes. It goes nuts from there. I could talk about textual citations.
I didn't realize the whole Jesus thing started that early. I thought that was a much later development. That's crazy. It's like right away as unicorns are kind of being established in the canon of kind of early Western thought. They're right away being tied to Christological imagery.
It's interesting. This is a process of development that takes about, if you just look at the textual evidence that we have, the Physiologus does seem to be the first place where this happens. The major previous source that we're talking about is Pliny, and then the major other source is the scriptures. There's always going to be other ephemera and things that were less influential or things that we've lost access to. But those are the three major touch points. There become other touch points later. But those are always, any further touch points are just sort of radiating points. Where these three things and the way that these two streams have crossed and turned into a third new thing, everything else is just repeating from there. They're not really elaborating; it's just repeating from there.
I am aware of earlier references to unicorns. I think there are versions, for instance, of the Greek myth of Hades sort of kidnapping Persephone. Where, certainly there's some where he grabs her as he rides his chariot pulled by steeds, but there are versions and then subsequent depictions where he's like riding a unicorn, for instance. But it's interesting because they are really scattered references, both artistically and literarily, and it is always this. The unicorn is very clearly a monster, right? Like it is a monster that is to be feared, and its wildness can sort of be tamed by a lady in that very King Kong, like 'twas beauty slayed the beast kind of a way. But then to jump just no holds barred into, and that's like Jesus, is a wild take. Pun kind of intended.
Yeah, it's a big jump, and it is interesting to note that that whole thing, because Pliny leaves it at this animal can't be taken alive, end of story, moving on. We're talking about some other stuff, some other weird creatures they have in India, but the Physiologus, it's right there. He's like, no, but there is a way to take it alive. It involves this virgin, and he leaps into her lap, moving on, and it goes on from there. So this is, but you're right. There's still, there are some gaps here. Sort of like the underpants gnomes in South Park. It's like step 1, steal underpants. Step 3, take over the world. But step 2, I don't know. I feel like we're missing something here.
Right.
So as far as I know, but as far as I've read, no one. There are no further links in the chain that we have access to. It's just crazy. There it is, like the Physiologus or some source that he was drawing on that's completely lost to us. Makes this connection that in fact this uncapturable feral animal can be captured by a virgin who opens her lap to him. The words it's always the same word, sinus, and it can mean either breast or lap. It mostly means it's like sinusoidal, like a sine wave. That's what the word we get. It's from the swoop that your toga makes when you've thrown it over your shoulder.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it really directs towards the bosom, but it can also extend to the lap. And like Isidore, for instance, in 636, who's another major spreader of this into the Middle Ages and bestiaries. He talks about the Virgin specifically opening her bosom, and so that's really more of a bosom image than a lap image, as it seems to more be with the Physiologus. But anyway, yeah, This is taking a long time, though. I mean, the three major textual points that we have that go to this one tradition, because you're right, like unicorns, they're in most every culture. Tons of cultures have unicorns, and then there's all other kinds of strands of development of the unicorn. I mean, but it's just this one strand passes through 3rd century BC to 1st century AD, and then really takes this definitive shape in the 4th century AD. And like, that takes a long time.
Sure, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there is a Chinese version of this, the pronunciation of which I will not attempt to butcher. But I mean, it has scales, but it is very much like sort of the horse goat with the single horn. But what's interesting is it's kind of similar here, right? The single horn, and we haven't really gotten to this, but it's considered to have healing properties in just the same way that the Western unicorn is, and it's also this very, very wild, aggressive animal. That only, a certain type of person or a certain class or specifically a certain moral fiber of person can capture. And so that does cross culture in a really, really interesting way. And yet, despite being a creature that is firmly kind of rooted in wildness, this reminds me a little bit of our conversation on demons. In some sense, I infer anyway, when I'm looking at, for instance, the tapestries at the cloisters or any of the other artworks that I'm actually really excited to get to, that, the unicorn is supposed to be kind of the microcosm of what wildness is, of what wilderness is, and kind of the crazy wildness of the outside and the untamed and the natural, right? And in most cases, that is associated with a carnivorous animal in literature or art.
Sure.
Right. We're talking about a lion. We're talking about a wolf. Right. But in none of these accounts is the unicorn considered to be predatory. It is considered to be like an herbivore to the degree that, so there's we've made a few Jewish references, sort of the vaguely anti-Semitic one in the quote you were reading, and then of course the Jewish scholars who were initially translating the Septuagint. There is a rabbi who I follow on TikTok who's based in the Jersey Shore, Rabbi Rappaport, and he answers anybody's questions about Judaism. And somebody asked, like, would it be kosher to eat a unicorn? Yes. And so he went back over all the places where unicorns are mentioned in the Talmud, and he explains, like, yes, 100%, because it's a cloven hoofed animal that chews its cud, right? And so here we go, like this. Very clearly, there's a picture being painted of a goat, a deer, kind of a creature, not even really a horse. Right. Even though modern depictions would tell you it's a horse. No, this is like more an antelope, goat, deer thing that just happens to be, despite the fact that it is kosher to eat it and it is definitely an herbivore. It's just so ferocious that it puts even the lion to shame in terms of being a hunting trophy.
That's right. And so the ferociousness is really important. Throughout, it's going to be really important in its artistic representation. Here, thinking about the artistic representations coming from these two cross streams turning into one stream, all connected. So that's super important. Is its fierceness. Super important is this is maybe not totally intuitive, but of course this rapidly gets further allegorized. So Basil the Great, who dies in 379, so he's actually the limiting point for when we know that the Physiologus has to have been translated into Latin, because he quotes it, and specifically talking about the unicorn. He says, Christ is the power of God. Therefore, he is called the unicorn because the one horn symbolizes one common power with the Father.
Oh, weird take.
Right. So this is, in the end, it's a kind of a Trinitarian thing, the strong Christian insistence that the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit are three persons in one God with a common divinity, common will, common power, all the rest. So the uniness of the unicorn. So it's once you've gotten to the physiologus, and it can be tamed only by coming to rest. So it's wild, it's ferocious, it's totally untamable. No human power can stop it. It becomes meek and mild in the lap of a virgin. And so there's a strong Christ thing going on now. But it also has the one horn representing that it is one with the Father. So now you've got this like two natures in Christ kind of jam going on, and this stays. Like all these things stay. And you can say, I'm not really sure all these things fit together. I don't care. They all stay. Like they all stay. None of them go.
Right. They're all being piled on top of each other, which is something fun whenever we talk about art history, right? It's always a bunch of different references that have a lot of cognitive dissonance between them, kind of getting piled onto one another. This Trinitarian thing is interesting. I mean, is there any art specifically that you're aware of that riffs off of that initial theme? Because a lot of the ones that I'm aware of do have to do with kind of the wildness. And then we do see a lot of the Marian imagery, right? The unicorn sort of settling in the lap or the bosom of the Virgin Mary. And I have a few that I am particularly fond of in that regard. But this kind of Trinitarian thing, that comes out of the blue for me. That's a weird one. Are there any that you feel like represent that motif particularly well? Or is that not something that people pick up on quite as much?
I haven't seen it. That's the best I can say. I haven't seen it. I mean, anytime you have the emphasis on the fierceness, you're going to have the emphasis on like the power and the strength and this kind of thing. You're going to be able to see it that way. But I would love to say, oh, here's this really cool, like Trinitarian draped unicorn image, but like I haven't seen it.
Well, there's the challenge for today's episode.
Yeah, there's the challenge. So, find it, bro.
Please tell me if I'm wrong on this. I'm more than happy to be called out on this one. But one of the things that I did see repeated without any citation to it is that despite these great thinkers that these great church figures talking about this so positively, that the Council of Trent itself made a statement about unicorns not being an okay thing to compare Jesus to because the motif was quote unquote too licentious. And I read this from exclusively sources that were like very prudish and were being like, and that was a good thing for them to do because unicorns are evil and they're fantasy. Yeah. And I'm a Christian, and so I don't like fantasy. That's bad. Is there any legitimacy to that at all?
I haven't heard it. That would be really fun. Unfortunately, the documents of the Council of Trent are really big, and without further citation, it would be really hard to just. I can't look it up while we're talking. But I can try to do my best to do my homework and remember to see if I can talk about it next time. But
but let's because it does. I will say it does. Oh yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say like, well, let's talk images though. Let's dig into a little bit about this because I do have some licentious ones.
Okay, thank you, because that's what I wanted to talk about. Because as soon as you say, here's this wild, savage creature with a single horn jutting out of its head, and it's jumping into the lap of a virgin. I mean, look.
I don't get what you're suggesting. I don't get what you're implying.
Little school kid.
I don't get what you're implying.
Well, I'm sorry that your social handicap stops you from picking up what I'm putting down, but I don't think that one has to be a particularly dirty-minded school child to pick up something deeply phallic in the idea of a unicorn when it's phrased precisely that way. So I don't necessarily fault, although I would disagree, but I don't necessarily fault if I'm indeed right that the Council of Trent was like, no, we don't like this. We don't like this very much. That response makes sense to me, even if I don't agree with it.
It just seems weird. All I'm saying is it just seems weird.
It just seems weird. I don't like it.
It's so like, yeah. Well, so let me we can point to a couple of examples. So well, first let's just, before we get to like the sort of edgy ones, like ones
we can't keep backtracking every time we try to make a point. You say, but before we get to that,
no, I'm not actually
go 500 years in the past.
500 years in the past. Oh. So this is actually jumping forward a little bit. We'll go straight to licentious ones. That's cool. So here's a cool one for our gentle listeners who are gently watching. It's relatively, well, it's not early at all. It's from the 13th century. It's from the Rochester Bestiary from about 1230.
Beautiful.
It's great. So the animal it's very clearly a horse with a big long horn. So a lot of the other kind of stuff, the sort of goatiness and the feet of an elephanty stuff, like that's all gone. This is represented really as a horse with a big horn. And like it's all nestled up in the lap of this lady, and it is very busily being stabbed through the side by this kind of aggro looking guy wearing chainmail and a shield.
They're always, I will say that is a common thing. They are always guys who kill unicorns, not chill dudes.
It turns out, well, I mean, it does.
They always feel very broy and aggressive, very frat kind of feeling.
Yeah, not a cool jam. I just want to talk, just say like, hey, listen, man, maybe the problem's inside. Maybe the real unicorn that you want to kill is your dad.
Your father.
Exactly. I love it. That's where we both went. I'm sure that's totally normal. I wouldn't worry about that.
We're both very Freudian.
Yeah, there's nothing
the horse with the huge giant phallic symbol that you're trying to kill. That's your dad, my guy.
It's probably your dad, brah. Don't worry about it. The thing that's like distinctive about this image is that the lady whose lap he is resting in, she totally naked. And he is resting his head. He's really resting his head completely in her lap, and then the horn is kind of jutting out, actually past it's breaking the frame of the scene, which is really cool. And she kind of has her hand down in her groin, and like the other one is kind of reaching out to like pat his back as he's being stabbed. It's kind of a weird jam. But like, yeah, this is the only one I found where she's completely naked. It's really distinctive. Like visually, there's very clearly like like an Eve thing going on. He's like behind the unicorn is a kind of a tree that looks like 3 artichokes coming out of the ground. Don't worry about it. That's what trees look like. And she is kind of sitting on nothing, but it's cool. I wouldn't worry about that. That's how people sit. And it's like there's a kind of an Eve thing going on here, like the unicorn as Adam, Christ, tree of life, tree of death, like the creation, womb stuff going on. But it's still a jam, like, yeah. You look at this image and you think like, there's a lot going on here.
Sure.
That's
there is a lot going on, and it reminds me actually of another image. So because you're right, I haven't seen too many like naked people with unicorns before. The only one I've seen though is actually, I had referenced kind of the abduction of Persephone in Greek mythology, but there is, I think it's in the 1500s, a kind of a woodcut, and how much I love, these woodcut prints. This German, block print of Hades kidnapping Persephone, and that's the only other one I've seen where it's like this really savage unicorn. It's got like the big gross horse teeth and the lolling tongue and everything, and then she's being swept away, and she is fully nude, and very a lot of detail is paid to the musculature and stuff, which is of course part and parcel of the time. But it because that's the only other image I'm familiar with that ever would depict nudity alongside the unicorn, it really makes an even like more intense juxtaposition because of kind of the peacefulness of the image that you're referencing, compared to how violent the Hades version is, you know?
Yeah. No, it is, because like, I mean, at the same time, like, this image is pretty violent. I was just looking at it more closely and realizing, like, oh, it's not just that the like aggro dude who's stabbing him is stabbing him in the side. He is stabbing him in the side, but the spear is actually is a lance, excuse me, is actually depicted as going into his side and then coming all the way out his chest, which is a long way out. It's like actually pretty dramatic. Yeah, pretty dramatically represented, I would say. So yeah, I mean, it's a weird image, because again, it's this mixture of that's part of it from the beginning, is this weird mixture of kind of like violence and savagery and peace and like mildness all at once. And I wouldn't actually shy away from thinking about the like sort of phallic character of it, and the sort of semi-sexual character of it. Certainly the I'm not gonna say that's sorry, that's silly to say, like I mean, it's clearly a fully sexual and generative image. Not
a pornographic image.
Well, I mean, not necessarily in the sense of like sexual intercourse. Like, I mean, that's always the question. I mean, I would say there's a question here. Like, it's sexual, it's generative. That's the whole point. I mean, that's that you see right away in the physiologus, because the idea is that he's descending into the lap of the Virgin and is thus being born. Right.
That doesn't necessarily naturally occur to my imagination, but what I will say, looking at the bestiary image you're referencing, there's sort of these like giant flowers and leaves growing out of the landscape that we find this unicorn being slewn in. And in the medieval sense, these giant flowers are very asparagus-y looking, giant asparagus, but the way they're positioned, they're not growing out of the wound in the side of the unicorn, but they are positioned so as to seemingly allude to, in kind of an artistic parallel way, that they are stemming from the wound of this unicorn. So the whole kind of the unicorn being born thing, that does not naturally intuit for me, I'll be honest. But
no, I mean, not in that image. No, I'm not saying you don't.
Oh, not in that image.
I'm not saying you see it in that image. I'm saying like.
Okay.
No. I don't think that's what's being represented in that image. Not at all. But just like the kind of conceptual,
I will say the generativity.
Yeah.
The generativity with these giant kind of wild asparagus-y things sprouting out of where the unicorn is bleeding from in his side. Again, very Jesus-y, wound in the side kind of a thing. You know, that, okay, I can jive with that. But I think there's some stuff, I don't know. I'm worried about getting the conversation off track, but we're talking about this kind of, you know, generativity, sexuality thing. And we're saying, yeah, you know, we're almost taking for granted. Yeah. And that's, you know, kind of Jesus-y. And what we're not talking as much about is, okay, here's this virgin that he's submitting to, that ostensibly is Mary, right? I mean, I think we can infer that when there's, you know, a virgin in association with the Jesus image, it's probably going to be Mary, but that's probably weird for a lot of people. That would be weird, not just for non-religious people, but a lot of, you know, Christian people and Catholic people thinking, well, Jesus doesn't really submit to Mary. You know, it's not like her virtue is so, you know, amazing that he says, well, you know, I don't know. That doesn't necessarily compute to a modern spiritual lens as much. Can you shed light on that? Am I inferring something wrong here, or?
Yeah, I think that's I mean, no, actually, when you put it that way, because you're right. That is what's weird about, like, if you think about like immediate biblical parallels, it's more like with the scene as it's described by Physiologus or like by Isidore of Seville. It's more akin to like, and actually as it's painted quite often, it's more akin to like, there's this scene where this great biblical hero Samson, who's like, he's mighty and nobody can conquer him, and he's got all the strength and stuff, but he's got this like a lady who is Delilah, who's keeps asking him like, hey Samson, it's so great that you're like such a beefcake and everything, that's really awesome. If someone wanted to unbeefcake you, how would that person do it? And like he tells her things, but it's not true 2 or 3 times, and she's like, and like people come in and they try to like do the thing that she told them to do, and like it doesn't work because he lied to her. And then like the 3rd time she's like, oh my gosh, you don't love me, Samson, oh my gosh, and like Samson doesn't get the message that like maybe you can't trust this lady, and so he like tells her the solution, which is his hair, and he like basically puts his head in her lap and falls asleep, and she cuts his hair, and then like it ends badly for Samson. So like there's a lot of biblical parallels with this scene, but like Delilah's not a hero, and this is bad. Like what happens there is bad.
Well, and also Samson is very clearly being tricked. And
he's being tricked. Like it's all like none of the valences here work. Like the visual parallel is strong, but none of the valences work.
Right. Yeah. Like for a Christian thinker, like, Isidore, Basil the Great, or any of these people that you're referencing, like there's some key factors that are important here, which are like, yeah, Mary isn't earning salvation.
Yeah.
Mary certainly isn't tricking Jesus. Jesus isn't being tricked by anybody. He's very voluntarily submitting to death.
Yeah.
Like
it's just there.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I mean, you have to say like some of these things, like they don't work great, And I would say that like part of the image itself is kind of like trumping past some of these conceptual problems and just going for it. So like if you think of it as emphasizing Christ's humility, that he never stops being the all-powerful one, the all-powerful God who shares the one power with God, and who nonetheless in that powerful state chooses to take on like the lowliness of human nature, and chooses to do so in the womb of the Virgin, and therefore becoming, in this sense, physically dependent on her freely, which is to say, what is it? He freely chooses to have need of the Virgin Mary. Like that works, like that works. So if one thinks about it that way, like that works. But there just remain problems with the image. Would you write when you're thinking about it, like seriously and theologically, that don't like, they're just not going to hang together. Like in the end, they're not going to hang together. Like there's not much you can do to make them hang together.
And look, let's talk again purely as artists here for a second. That's true of any artistic image representing anything, right? Any analogy or symbolism, when held up to scrutiny, is going to have a couple of buts attached to it. Like, this is a good analogy for this thing, but not so much these other components of that same thing.
Right, exactly.
Right. And so, sometimes when I'm hired by like a religious client to do a religious artwork, they'll say to me, well, how do you plan to, depict all of these different aspects of this thing? Because in the past, I've seen this depiction. I didn't like it for this reason. I didn't like this, but, and they're looking for kind of a perfect depiction of whatever religious thing they want to see depicted. And I always try to give kind of the same answer, which is that I can't depict, let's say it's God that they're asking me to depict. I can't depict God. I just can't. I can depict the aspects that I want people to know about God.
Which seems like the prudent thing to do.
Let's narrow down what specifically we want our audience to know about God in this case, or whatever the thing happens to be. And let's try real hard to represent that stuff, knowing that there will be some things that get left behind or get even actively contradicted by the imagery, just because you got to know what your limits are as an artist. And so what that says to me is that for those trying to reveal something about their belief in Christ through the symbolism of a unicorn, what the unicorn symbolized about Jesus positively far outweighed for them all of the cognitive dissonance of all the problems that you and I are pulling out right now. And I'm wondering what you think that is. Because for me, having talked recently about, for instance, in our Easter episode, like the motif of gardener Jesus, this naked Jesus wearing a big straw hat out in the middle of a garden, and a lot of the different episodes we've done, for me, the thing that immediately occurs is this is a group of people who really, really want us to understand two things about Jesus, and two things primarily. One, the kind of intimacy that he wants to have with us, and two, that intimacy in no way, shape, or form abates his wildness. They don't want him to be seen as anything other than intensely wild and kind of savage and mighty in a very dangerous power of God, divine, better watch out kind of a way. And that intimacy and that savagery together, almost like C.S. Lewis talks about when with his analogy for Jesus, Aslan the lion, he says, he is a good lion, but he is not tame.
Right.
That kind of an idea seems to me, that's what I'm inferring. These people want us to know most about Jesus through the unicorn. But I mean, what do you think? Are there elements that could be there from like a more historical lens that I'm missing?
I think that's super duper 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 central, because it's there from the beginning, right? Like if you even thinking about the other stream where it's translating this word for a wild ox, like that's why all the images, like almost all the scriptural images that's going to be working with images of God's might, his ferocity, his power, his unconquerability. And then you've got that second stream with like Pliny, that he's unconquerable, can't even be captured, and that's because there's this intentional Christian move where you say, like, what is so wild and so ferocious that no human power can dominate it, that it's totally unable to be conquered, and yet has been conquered, right? You say, well, if this is God, how did that happen? Well, it happens in the humility of the incarnation, and it happens with him choosing to allow himself to be conquered by the crucifixion, and then he shows himself as simultaneously utterly docile, meek, powerless, and infinitely mighty, and on all the rest. Like, which you're totally right. Like, I think you just have to, like, again, not the primary conceptual, emotional, and like sort of immediate, even theological associations that I would like put with unicorns at the present moment. Looking at my sister's My Little Ponies growing up, like, I never thought this, my friends, is an obvious symbol of the unconquerable power of God and his astonishing humility.
Nor would I say, would I have ever inferred this is a symbol of kind of savage masculinity. But that's really what we're talking about, right? Like, to lean into those sexual themes that you're describing, there's a clear, especially in the bestiary where, she is naked and not only naked, but very clean and sort of pale and, virtuous looking and, kind of idealized. And then in juxtaposition with this very savage, hairy, furry, unicorn with blood dripping down it and this, huge spear sticking out of its head, there's clearly a masculine feminine thing being painted here, to the degree that, on Reddit and Tinder, I say I'm a male feminist. I'm joking. But, to the degree that in kind of a feministy way, like, there's kind of an inherent sexism there, right? Where it's like, women are pure and chaste and on a pedestal, and there's this savage masculinity. It's interesting then to bridge that gap and go, oh, now unicorns are considered the most feminine, the most girly, to the degree that, like, Googling unicorns again will take you to tons of people doing think pieces about how they're too girly and we should actually discourage, girls from playing with My Little Pony and things like this because it's not feminist enough. And gosh, I mean, it's just a hell of a journey for one little animal to take. in terms of what it represents.
This poor little guy. Well, but what if there was hypothetically speaking, a really cool bridge image that I just happened to kind of hypothetically have right here that I wanted to show you?
Seriously? Do
yes.
you actually have something?
I do. And it's this. Because you said like, so you've got like this woman and she's like this, and it's like, and so you think like Christians, like this is going to be the Virgin Mary, like, Jesus's mother. But I say to you, what if it isn't? So I found, take a look. It's absolutely amazing. This is the only image like this I found. It's a French image from, it's actually just a German image, but it's held in the Louvre from about 1440 to 1460.
French bastards taking everything.
They are. And so you've got this like, here you've got this actually very dainty. Everything is inverted in a certain sense. You have this extremely dainty unicorn with this very like lithe, almost gazelle like body.
It's almost like a greyhound.
Actually,
like
very
the way its chest
that's
slopes
right, because
it's into its stomach. It's like greyhound.
It's greyhound is exactly right, because going up into the haunches, like it's very greyhound, very lithe, very lean. It's holding up its paw, its right forehoof very daintily. It's looking very delicately with a very mild, almost feminine expression on its face, and the horn is not sort of like crassly jamming into the woman's face or like in the way anywhere. It's like delicately sort of pointing just away from the image. And the woman, here is a jam that we could talk about some other time, because actually we should talk about some other time, because it's really worth talking about. The woman is 100% covered in hair, except for her face and her breasts. You say to yourself,
yeah, like really,
fur.
I mean,
yeah, big long head hair.
She is like a lady Sasquatch.
Yeah.
I mean, she's clearly a human being because she's got a lady face and lady breasts, but and then she's got, of course,
dainty,
long mermaidy type hair.
Yeah.
But everything else is like shaggy, like she hasn't shaven for a couple of days. Like
she got
shaggy.
She got belly fur.
I'm a Sasquatch.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a wild woman.
She's a
That's
wild.
She's a
Sasquatch.
A sassy
Sasquatch. That's it. She's a Sasquatch.
Yes.
So this is
TM.
TM. Yeah. You got to pay me for that if you use it. This is Mary Magdalene.
Oh shit! Really?
Mm-hmm. I'm not going to tell you why, because I want to have a whole episode on Mary Magdalene and her fur, because it's amazing. But just take my word for it. I promise you. This is Mary Magdalene. And now this is a totally different image, but it's the same image, and it only has its power because of the more broadly spread Christian iconography of it really being the Virgin Mary, Eve, these other kinds of things, always the same. I mean, those which are the same in this conceptual sense. But now it's Mary Magdalene. And so now it's a whole different jam, because it's not, this sort of like, oh, we put you on a pedestal and like you just be perfect and I'll just do all the hard stuff and then you'll come and like comfort me or whatever kind of. It's not that at all.
Mm-hmm.
What captures Christ? Repentance captures Christ. And that is awesome. That's a whole cool jam. It's Mary Magdalene's repentance and her penitence. I mean, that's partly what's being emphasized by the fur, is what captures Christ. And that is, I think, really, really beautiful.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And like, okay, so here's where my medievalism is coming in, because, you get in on the whole kind of literary level. I get in more on the sort of
Game of Thrones
fantasy bestiology level. And yeah, exactly. And, but there is this motif, right, in almost every culture of the wildeman, of the wild man, right? And the most common version of we know of now to a modern lens is the Sasquatch, right? But indigenous peoples talked about something like the Sasquatch, far earlier than European settlers ever documented it. And then in medieval Europe, It's a very similar creature, but always depicted with like a male face and then covered in either brown or often green hair. And he would kind of wear a crown and a diaper of leaves.
Yes.
And he would carry a big staff or a big club. And there are one or two images I've seen of a female wild man. But it's always, representing the same motif that we're talking about, right? Like the ultimate in wildness, the ultimate in savagery. And, here's this creature that, is out in the wilderness and it's, has this, Grendel, right? Like Grendel in Beowulf is considered like the Wildeman. And I've never seen it though, explicitly just in a Christian context, and to juxtapose that with the unicorn, who's the other thing that the medieval imagination considers to be the most savage and the most wild, and that one is sort of being saved by the other. I mean, maybe this is me going too far, but it's almost like the unicorn is, and I'm speaking from a Christological lens here, but it's almost like the unicorn is taking on wildness to go meet her and hers.
I mean, I like that conceptually. It works really well theologically. It's not happening in the image though, and that's what's so wild about it, because it's like a complete role reversal, kind of. I mean, it is and it is and it isn't.
I mean, what I'm saying there does actually require the person looking at it to come in, and I'm assuming that maybe someone looking at it in Germany in the 1400s, would have had these sensibilities, but like this is very clearly like a wild woman. This is very clearly
it's a wild woman, and then this very tame, this meek and mild by nature. That's the thing. What's funny about this, like meek and mild by nature, because it looks like a happy kind of mild mannered greyhound with this gigantic horn representing perhaps presumably the one power of the father.
One power of the father, or the phallic power,
or a big penis, which is fine. I mean, it's cutting horizontally across her breasts. Like it's just, there it is, but no, it's super wild. So,
literally,
I mean, literally. I mean, it would be really cool to it would be really wonderful to find an image where you've got Mary Magdalene as the wild woman, and then you've got this wild, depicted as wild unicorn. That would be really cool to see them both, because that would be a really strong visual, like a single combination image of this lovely scene that you're describing.
Right.
I haven't tracked it down. Of course, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Because
but that's the thing. It's just like, so when we talked about mermaids around the same time last year, which it was not intentional that this would be a sequel to our mermaids episode.
Everything is a sequel to our mermaid episode.
Because our mermaids episode is our best episode.
It's absolutely our best episode. Everybody go back and listen to it again. Do it.
Seriously. But it is funny that at almost exactly the same time the following year, we're going back and we're like, okay, post-Easter, what do we want to talk about? We want to talk about a fantasy animal.
Probably fantasy animal, maybe a wild creature. Woman, maybe.
Right. Yeah. We want to talk about a fantasy creature that represents Jesus in some way. And it's so interesting that we are kind of coming back to this well. But what's different between the unicorns and then the mermaid thing is it was almost easier to kind of do a census of mermaid art, because although there's a lot of it, it does tend to happen in such consistent themes. But unicorns are just so popular that it's like you dropped a rock on a piece of glass and then it just shatters in every possible direction, right? And yes, everything does come back to that. Every piece of glass that shatters off does come back to that central initial crack, right? So you can trace an artistic lineage and everything references everything else, but it's also split off in so many directions that you can't really say, oh, well, all the unicorns of this kind go into this category and all the unicorns of that kind go into that artistic you can't be that academic about it, because every unicorn depiction kind of exists on its own, referencing everything else, but being fully independent as an artistic and philosophical motif.
No, that's what you're totally right. That's what's so trippy about it. Right. So for instance, to the point that the unicorn ends up being Like, let me give you the most extreme example, just from this like kind of historical context that we've been talking about, like with the evolution of this
100%.
image, everything. The most Twilight kind of example, and of course, I mean,
I hope you're not about to spoil one of the paintings I chose, but go.
no,
for
I'm
it.
not. I have
right.
an image of this. I'm not sure I'm going to share it, but no, the most Twilight image. By Twilight here, I'm speaking of the most important art novel series in the world, given by how frequently we reference it.
The single most important literary work of the 21st century. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. By which I mean, that like this sense of werewolves and vampires and stuff has literally nothing to do with any way that they've ever been depicted. It's just using the words and kind of moving on, which is kind of delightful. Yeah. I was in Columbus, Ohio one time for
huge mistake.
It was. Mm-hmm. Yes.
My condolences.
Yeah. It's Columbus is not the world's most pleasant place to live. It was the start of June. They have a very, 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 very prominent kind of citywide Pride Month. It's heavily advertised in kind of every. It's very prominent, and
very much part of the city's brand.
Very, very, very much part of the city's brand. And I saw there was a big billboard from a kind of a local progressive Protestant church. That was sort of signaling that they were participating in this movement as well, and it's a big cartoon drawing of. I mean, the text was something like "All are welcome" or something like that. I don't remember, but what really caught my attention was this big cartoon drawing and the billboard sized of Christ waving, riding a unicorn.
I want to get that as a tattoo.
So much one could say about this. There is so much one could say about this. But what I love the most about it is that you look at this like from an artistic perspective and you think, why are there two Christs in that image?
Jesus riding Jesus. It's Jesusception. It's all the Jesus.
There's turtles all the way down.
Turtles all the way down, man.
I can't. Why is... It's amazing. It's amazing. I'm just saying.
So what's going to happen here is you're going to get the Jesus tattoo on your hand, and then I'm going to get the unicorn tattoo on my hand, and that when we high five, Jesus rides the unicorn.
But why are there two Jesuses? I don't get it.
I don't know, man, but I love it. But again, why is any of this stuff? Because again, none of these things hold up to much scrutiny. You just have to take them for exactly what the artist was intending and go, that's cool. I'm not going to look at it any further. And that actually is a perfect pivot into the image that I was afraid you were going to spoil, but my favorite. And it's sort of a basic choice to be contributing to the conversation. I admit that. It's always annoying when somebody is just like, oh, I want to share a Renaissance painting. But I don't feel like we can talk about unicorns in art without talking about Raphael's portrait of a lady with a unicorn.
Yes, bring
in 1505, which I love because it is literally the definition of this does not hold up to scrutiny. So this is pretty clearly, and most art historians think that he was inspired by the Mona Lisa on some level, that like he was maybe trying to riff off of its success. But he paints this blonde, blue-eyed woman kind of sitting between the two Grecian Revival columns, gorgeous kind of red velvet, poofy sleeves, gold front on her dress and kind of an off-the-shoulder thing, really lovely rendered fabrics and textiles and stuff. And then in her lap, she is holding essentially like, if you've ever been to a farm, as many homeschooled people such as me have been, if you've ever been to a farm and you've seen pygmy goats, and they're like little cute goats that are like permanently baby goats, and then you've seen a baby one of those, this like a baby pygmy goat. So it's already a permanent baby, and then it's a cute little baby thing on top of that. This is that, but for unicorns. And she is holding the fuzziest little guy And he does have the horse face.
He does.
And the big black eyes and the little pointy ears.
The cutest little horn you've ever seen.
Is so shaggy and fluffy. Like it is so like you can, I mean, he's so good. Raphael is so good at texture, and you can totally imagine what it would feel like to run your hands through the kind of shaggy goat-like coat of this horse that it's coming out everywhere, including like kind of a fluff on the top of its head where its big horn is sticking out. That compared to her, like this horn is basically like a milkshake straw size. Like this is how small.
That's right.
This unicorn is sitting in her lap.
She could definitely eat a milkshake with that horn. Maybe she was planning on it. I mean, she's looking kind of ominously pensive, I have to say. She could be. And
I always do look ominously pensive whenever I'm about to have a delicious milkshake.
I think most of us do.
Right. Yeah. But here's what's funny about this in terms of it not holding up to scrutiny. They have done scans of this painting, as they often do with historical paintings, to see, you can see often under paintings, like, you know, someone will maybe have painted something on top of another painting, either because they didn't like the previous painting or because the previous painting was scandalous or because they got the canvas cheap from another artist. Sometimes you can see the artist's initial sketches, which can be very, very, very rich in terms of understanding the process of an artist from history. They did a scan of this. It was absolutely a puppy in the first draft.
Yeah.
He painted a dog in the first draft, and what they know that they know that this painting was actually meant to be a gift for the woman in the painting's marriage. This was commissioned as a wedding gift, and nobody knows what happened. But at some point, this little puppy, which in, you know, Renaissance symbolism is supposed to represent loyalty, essentially,
fidelity,
right? You know,
exactly,
have this little dog. It's going to be loyal to me, so I'm holding this dog to represent the loyalty in my marriage. At some point, very late in the process, they go, this needs to become a unicorn to represent her virginity and her chastity, most likely.
Holy crap! We got a unicorn. You got a unicorn. This puppy.
But we already have the dog, so we need the unicorn to be the size of a cute little wiener dog. And as a result of whatever drama happened in this poor girl's life, probably very close to her wedding day, we get the absolute cutest depiction of a unicorn in human history.
I think that's exactly right. That is, yeah, you're right. Like there is no way. Like it's even got its little like fuzzy four hooves, like tucked into her fingers, you know, and this very like
snuggling.
It's like very snuggly, and it's like mouth is open in this very like happy to be here kind of like just sort of panting happily, is unicorns do kind of way.
And not to overanalyze the stuff, but we're two white men with a podcast. Why not? Right. Like, so I had a history professor in undergrad who is, you know, a very Catholic man, but he was sort of doing a history of the way different cultures view femininity. And obviously any cute, kind of clever sounding summary is going to be reductive. But he said this really interesting thing that he said, you know, when a group has a power that another group doesn't have, he's speaking specifically about a woman's fertility, right? When a group has a power that another group doesn't have, first, that group is worshipped for it. They're worshipped for that power that I don't have. And then I want to protect them. I want to protect that power that they have. I want to keep it safe. I want to safeguard it. And then I want to subjugate it. And there's always this like continuum in the way femininity is depicted in a lot of different cultures. And again, that is a reductive summary. We could find all kinds of exceptions to it. But speaking in the broadest of terms and painting with the broadest of brushes, I think that that's a good summary for the way femininity, and fertility are often kind of depicted over the life of a given culture's art. And I think something really similar is happening with the unicorn, where we're starting off as this wild, wild savage thing. And then we're adding to the stew this like, okay, but he's tamed by femininity such that he can actually be tricked by it. And then we get into kind of this Christological thing of, okay, well, the unicorn is voluntarily letting himself be tricked on behalf of the virginal woman here. And maybe, that woman is innocent and pure, like, Mary, the mother of God, or maybe that woman is a wild woman like a Sasquatch or Mary Magdalene. And then the more we're seeing the woman be depicted alongside the unicorn, we start making more and more and more adaptations to the unicorn to make it go with that feminine image better. Most perfectly represented in this sort of microcosmic image that Raphael puts together of, this is a horse-faced unicorn. It doesn't have a little beard, right?
No,
and it's very tiny and it's very cute. And we're seeing the kind of reduction to cute in the unicorn that femininity often goes through in art. We slowly pull away the wildness and we're left with kind of a shell that represents something that we want femininity to be, but it's only a component of the larger whole. And by itself is really lacking. And again, even as I say it, I know that I'm overstating, but it does seem like there's a parallel here. It does. To go from the most kind of masculine, stereotypically masculine, savage creature to by far the most feminine, stereotypically feminine creature with like a My Little Pony thing. This Raphael image seems like one of the exact moments where that river changes course. And I wonder what that does say when we're starting our conversation speaking about the inherent kind of sexuality and generativity of these unicorn images. I do wonder what that says about our own view of our sexuality and of femininity and masculinity, getting either watered down or packaged differently according to what, the given culture wants to brand our sexualities as. I don't know. I mean, I'm genuinely curious, like, in your honest thoughts on this.
Well, I can say with this particular image, even if it's a watershed turning point of unicorn images into a more domesticated, less wild direction, it's hard to regret because this is the world's cutest puppy unicorn on the entire planet.
I do want to own it.
And I love it.
I want to own it.
I want it.
I want to read all this toxicity into it, but I also really want it as a pet.
I love it so much. I love everything about it. Yeah. I mean, you see something, I don't know. There is something about this. Something similar happens with angels, of course, right? That they,
oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, we did 2 whole episodes
right,
on that.
Because they go from this wild splendor of the representation of the unrepresentable character of the uncontrollable wild glory of God to like, we got a naked baby who's playing with a cardinal's hat. Look at him. So like there's just this like deep desire to like domesticate the wild things, because like, I mean, those are the words that we use for it, but it just means that you bring something that you can't control into your own control. And one way of doing that is by making it smaller than you, weaker than you, cuter than you, whatever, in ways that are kind of non-threatening. I'm going to be totally honest, I do not feel threatened by this unicorn. It's too adorable.
I mean, he could poke me, but he wouldn't poke me too bad.
Nah, he'd be so
okay.
Sweet. He'd be so sweet. And he would loan me his horns to drink a milkshake. And I give it that.
But isn't that interesting? I mean, because you're so right. I didn't connect it to the angels thing, but you're right. Like, it is exactly the same evolution or de-evolution or whatever. And isn't it interesting that evolution is cyclical? Because, I mean, as I mentioned in that Guardian article where it's trying to summarize, all the ways unicorns have been utilized, like the author is complaining that unicorns are so girly, in fact,
right,
that she as a self-respecting feminist doesn't want her daughter to play with them.
Yeah.
And
there's this,
and like, isn't it so funny that it's so cyclical where it's like, we take this wild thing and even in our art, even in our art, we can't stand something being wild. Even if it doesn't exist, we can't stand it being wild. So we domesticate the image to such a degree that it nauseates us. We become sick of how saccharine this thing is. You know, we took the wolf and we turned it into a pug dog, and we're embarrassed by it. And then there becomes this revolution, literally, you know, going back around the cycle to how can we re-wild it again?
Yeah, and you do see that in some contemporary, like,
it's crazy.
Yeah, and you do see that with some contemporary unicorn representation. I wish I could remember the exact name of it right now, but there's a I think it's an online comic that has sort of like carnivorous unicorns. So they're sort of like, they're like represented as sort of, I mean, they're carnivorous and like they eat people, you know. Right.
Or like, but, I mean, it's not a good movie, but the new Shazam movie that just came out, which is like a DC superhero, they got like a brand tie-in with Skittles, very evidently, because they talk about Skittles for like most of the movie. And then at some point, the cute little girl who like loves unicorns wishes for a unicorn. And so a unicorn shows up to help them save the day. But it's this gigantic black hulking unicorn with, you know, rippling muscles and like crazy fiery eyes, and its horn sort of bends in a more rhino-y way. And she rides this unicorn that she's feeding Skittles to and says, "Taste the rainbow, and like, and it's very much like a kind of, oh, we're parodying how girly unicorns are by making this super monstrous unicorn and referencing Skittles. But it's like, no, that is what unicorns are. Like you just took us back to the beginning again, and you don't even know.
Right. But of course, in a much trashier way, because in the end, rather than having this like totally wild and weird, but like thought about for hundreds of years kind of reflection on like, what's the wildest kind of wild? You know, oh, it's probably God because he's the wildest kind of wild. It's like, well, what's the wildest kind of wild? Well, Skittles just paid me $20 million. So,
which, I mean, no hate. If Skittles would like to pay us $20 million, you know, I'd gladly be sponsored by Skittles.
I hereby officially say that I'm open to being paid $20 million to be a Skittles podcast. Yes. I'm open to that. No, but that's right. Like because just in the end, it's like as the circle comes around, like it's just like very trashy. It's like I get it. You think you're being all risque by having, or being all edgy by having this like, oh, edgy sort of like scary, dangerous unicorn, and you feed it Skittles, I guess, because the CF Supra $20 million. But there's nothing to it. Like there's no there, you know, like, I did want to say like one thing, again, like, you know, a major theme for me kind of thinking about like these, like, why do I like to go back to these historical things and sort of run forward to feeding Skittles to while chanting. I mean, that's so on the nose that they were like literally chanting the
it's just a commercial.
It's just a commercial that they actually chant the slogan. It's so embarrassing.
It's so crass. It's disgusting.
That's incredible. It's because like in the end, I think, you know, so we're left with these contemporary sort of like circle around versions, which sometimes are delightful and sometimes like this are like really cringy, you know. So it's like, well, what do we do with it, you know? And like, I mean, I don't know. I think there's clearly because the unicorns are, you know, 30,000 streams going in like 30,000 different directions. You can do whatever you want with them. But like if one does want to like tap into the wildness of this, and I mean this in several senses, of this one stream that has its historical trajectory, and then I refuse to even by implication blame this adorable puppy unicorn. But maybe
Raphael's puppy unicorn.
If it is where it happens,
you are safe.
You're
Do
safe.
not say anything about my son. This adorable unicorn.
He's so adorable.
I love you.
Yeah, I love you so much. I hate your friends though. Your friends suck. Yeah, I have that feeling real strong right now. And but I mean, wherever it turns, like, you know, I think it does it like. That stream dilutes and it loses its force, and its conceptual power is kind of gone in a certain way. But like to say, like, so if you think like, well, I'm a Christian artist and I want to like, how do I jam on this? You know, I'd say like, I mean, you think about the various things that a unicorn can mean. Think about how you could just not just be like ironic or cheeky or a paid advertisement, but like how do you like tap more into the wildness of the power of it? Like we've offered a bunch of things here.
And the wildness of all these things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, I would just say like the wildness of you, the wildness of your sexuality, your masculinity or femininity, because, the masculine can be wild like the unicorn, the feminine can be wild like the wild woman, and the unicorn, the wildness of God, like there's really something here. I mean, even the fact that unicorns are so perennially popular, there's like, I would argue kind of that longing for the wildness of things.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think, I don't know. I mean, just like the incredible freedom here to like let these images work like in tension with each other, to bring things together that seem like they don't go together, and to kind of think through them visually and conceptually to where they do work, and like, I offer it as like a textual meditation on top of these kind of visual meditations. The first thing that this actually made me think of, because of this uncontrollable wildness of images that don't seem to work together, and this like insistence on the fierce indomitability combined with this like meekness and tameness and submission. There's nothing in this of the kind of like naturalized nice guy imagery of Christ. There's nothing in this of a kind of like an obvious connection of images that like the mind is going to easily embrace and kind of swallow down like a handful of Skittles. Taste the rainbow. I will accept that $20 million in cash or check. It's hard. Like it's hard viewing. It's hard thinking. It challenges the heart. It challenges the brain to like enter into its own wildness and then crack it open and like dwell there, which is really great. So like here's just one textual thing that it immediately made me think of. It's this beautiful, arguably the oldest, or was certainly one of the oldest Old English works, called The Dream of the Rood. And this is the poet's vision of how Christ goes to the cross. It says this. It says, "Unyering himself then," this is an Old English way of saying disrobing, taking his clothes off. "Unyering himself then, this young, it was God all surpassing, strong and set in purpose. He mounted upwards on gallows, heightened and humiliated, impetuous in the imagination of many and all, when he wanted to undo his humankind."
That's wild.
This is the wild font of like the visual imagination that we cannot lose, and that like we will only benefit if we force ourselves to tap into, which is to like take all these things that seem like they don't go together, and not just like randomly conjoin them in a sort of postmodern play, but like actually to let them make sense of one another, to like see how Christ allowing himself to be crucified on the cross is like mounting the gallows to undo his humanity, which is to say to undo the sin of of our humanity, right? Like to like see the wildness of the unicorn who is like tamed by the virgin, to see its sexual character, its generative character, to see like the repentance and all the rest, and like let them all be together, I'd say honestly, this kind of thinking is the genius that it is the major stream that allowed so many artists to use the Christian visual languages to create works of that grab, that capture, that sort of break and remake the heart and the eye. I'd say whether you want to do this with unicorns or anything else in the world, try to do this and go forth and create cool things.
This has been Created Things, a production of Art, Soul, and Mind, hosted by Jacob Flores-Popchak and Father Gabriel Toretta, produced by Kyle Meineke and Jessica Flores-Popchak. Theme song by Federico Carranza. For more on this podcast and the artists featured, follow us on Instagram at Created Things Podcast and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts are streamed.